Sometimes, the walls of psychiatric hospitals hold on to more than just their patients' screams. And once you hear the stories, you'll never think of them the same way again. I used to work the night shift at a psychiatric hospital in the Midwest, a place that was built in the 1950s and carried the weight of decades of pain inside its crumbling walls. The halls stretched endlessly, lined with chipped green paint and buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered with a faint hum. The smell of antiseptic never faded, no matter how many years passed. But beneath it was always something else. Old, stale, something that clung to your clothes after hours spent inside. I'd been warned during training. The night shift plays tricks on you. You hear things, you see things, but you have to keep walking. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the night in late January, when I realized not everything in that hospital could be explained away by fatigue. It was snowing outside, and the heating system struggled. Cold drafts seeped from vents, rattling with every gust. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me as I started my rounds. Clipboard in hand, shoes squeaking faintly against the linoleum, as patients in Ward C were long-term, heavily medicated, locked in their rooms. It was supposed to be uneventful. But as I passed room 12, I slowed. I heard murmuring. Not unusual. Patients often talked in their sleep. But this wasn't the muttering of one person. It was two voices, overlapping, one frantic and high-pitched, the other low, rasping, like air forced through a broken instrument. The patient in that room was Martin, middle-aged, withdrawn, rarely spoke during the day. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting a weak circle through the dark. Martin sat upright on the bed, eyes wide, lips trembling as they moved in hurried whispers. His gaze wasn't on me. It was fixed on the far corner, the darkest part of the room where the light didn't reach. "Martin," I whispered, "who are you talking to?" Didn't respond. His whispering only grew faster, his hands gripping the sheets so tightly his knuckles turned white. My flashlight beam flickered once, twice, then steadied. And for just a second, I saw it. A shape in the corner. Not the dresser, not the chair. It's taller, hunched, pressed against the wall like a shadow that refused to belong to anything. I blinked, and it was gone. My mouth went dry. Martin's head turned slowly, and finally his gaze met mine. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with tears. His lips stopped moving for the first time, and in a voice raw with fear, he whispered, "He doesn't like you." A chill ran through me so hard my hands shook. I tried to maintain composure, moving closer with my penlight to check his vitals. But as I reached for his wrist, his whole body stiffened. His mouth opened, and what came out wasn't Martin's voice. "Leave this ward." The voice was guttural, deeper than any human sound should be. It vibrated through the room, pressing against my ears until my stomach twisted. I staggered back, the pen clattering to the floor. My training screamed at me to leave, but something froze me in place. Martin's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, his lips trembling with words I couldn't make out. Then, as suddenly as it started, he collapsed onto the mattress, chest heaving, silent again. I backed out of the room, slammed the door shut, and locked it with shaking hands. My breath fogged in the cold hallway air, and for a moment, I thought I heard whispering on the other side of the door. Not Martin's. Something else. Reported it to the head nurse. She told me Martin was prone to episodes, that I was overtired, that I should stop letting stories get in my head. She promised it was nothing, but the next night, Martin was dead. They said it was suicide. He'd been found in the very corner he had been staring at, his body slumped against the wall. But when I saw the room the following morning, my stomach turned to ice. His fingernails had torn deep grooves into the concrete floor, as though he had tried to resist being dragged. The scratches weren't random. They formed a half circle around the spot where he died, like he had been clinging for dear life, while something pulled him toward the wall. The other nurses avoided the subject. His death was written up in a report, closed quickly. But I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow I saw, the voice that spoke through him. A week later, I had to do rounds again in Ward C. My hands shook as I turned the corner past room 12. The door was shut. The glass window covered with paper now, but as I walked by, I froze. From behind the door, muffled but distinct, I heard two voices whispering, one frantic, one deep. And when the overhead lights flickered, just for a second, I saw it reflected in the glass. A shadow taller than me, standing in the corner of the empty room. That was the night I decided to quit. But even now, years later, I wake up in the dark sometimes, certain I'll hear a rasping voice just inches from my ear, telling me once again that I don't belong. When I was in college, I took a part-time janitorial job at an abandoned psychiatric hospital that the university technically owned. Most of the building had been closed for years, but one wing was still used for storage. Old medical equipment, boxes of files, things the university didn't want to throw away, but had nowhere else to put. It was quiet work, lonely but easy money. At least, that's what I thought before I realized just how wrong I was. The hospital itself was a looming brick structure, 5 stories tall, with boarded-up windows and rust streaks running down the walls like old tears. I usually worked the evening shift, but one Friday, the supervisor asked me to stay late and clean the lower level of the west wing. The elevator had long since stopped working, so I had to take the stairwell, a narrow concrete passage that smelled of mildew and old bleach. My footsteps echoed as I descended, the sound swallowed quickly by the heavy silence below. When I pushed the heavy door open at the bottom, the air hit me, damp, stale, thick with dust. My flashlight beam cut across rusted gurneys and overturned wheelchairs, their shadows stretching grotesquely across the peeling walls. The deeper I went, the more it felt like I had stepped into a place the world had forgotten. The first hour passed without incident. I swept debris, gathered trash into heavy black bags, tried not to think too much about the dark stains on the floors. But then, while passing a series of old patient rooms, I noticed something strange. Several of the doors were still locked. Thick iron locks with sliding metal plates, as if the patients inside had been meant to stay forever. I paused at one of the doors, peering through the small glass slot. The room inside was bare, just a bed frame, a rusted chair, and cracked tiles on the floor. But as I leaned closer, I froze. I heard scratching. At first it was faint, like nails on wood, distant and easy to dismiss as rats, but it grew louder, more deliberate. Scrape, scrape. My throat went dry. I pulled back, shining the light down the hallway. Nothing, just doors and shadows. I told myself to keep working, but my nerves were already fraying. Every creak of the pipes above me sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of my flashlight made me imagine something waiting in the dark. Finally, I reached the last room. Its heavy lock had been broken, the door slightly ajar. The air seeping out was colder, carrying a smell that nearly made me gag, a mix of damp rot and something sour, metallic. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open wider. The walls were covered in scratches. It's not just a few desperate marks, but thousands of them, gouged deep into the plaster, layered over each other until the entire surface looked like it had been clawed apart. They weren't random either. They spiraled around the room in uneven circles, climbing higher and higher. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The scratches weren't just on the walls. They were on the ceiling. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand. It was when I heard it again, the scratching. Louder now, not behind me, above me. My heart hammered as I tilted the light upward. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw fingers retreating into a crack where the ceiling tiles met the wall. Long, pale fingers curling back into the darkness. That was enough. I stumbled out of the room, nearly dropping the flashlight as I backed into the hall. The scratching followed me for several steps, moving overhead, keeping pace with me as I hurried toward the stairs. By the time I burst through the stairwell door, I was drenched in sweat. I abandoned the mop, the bucket, even my cleaning cart. I didn't care. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, not slowing until I was outside, gasping in the freezing night air. I quit the job the next morning. The supervisor didn't ask questions. Maybe he already knew there were things in that building better left alone. But here's the part that still haunts me. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every night, when I lay in bed, I heard it, scratching. Soft at first, then louder, right above my ceiling. I told myself it was squirrels or branches against the roof. But the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too deliberate. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed a broom, and slammed it against the ceiling 3 times. The scratching stopped. I stood there, waiting, my breath shallow. Then, from just above me, in the silence, came 3 slow scratches in return. I moved out of that apartment within a month. I've tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I imagined it all, but deep down I know the truth. Whatever was locked away in that hospital wing never stayed behind. It followed me out. And sometimes when the night is quiet enough, I still hear it waiting. Patient, steady, just above my head. My cousin, Emily, worked as a psychiatric technician at a hospital on the East Coast. She was 24 at the time, fresh out of training, eager to make a difference. She always said she could handle anything. The long shifts, all the unpredictable patients, even the unsettling atmosphere of the hospital itself. The hospital was a massive concrete structure from the 1960s. Its windows narrow, and its halls echoing like empty tunnels. Even during the day it felt dim inside, the fluorescent lights casting a cold, lifeless glow. At night, though, the building changed. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. One of her patients was a woman named Evelyn. She was in her early 40s, calm, quiet, not prone to outbursts or violence. While others screamed, wept, or lashed out, Evelyn simply sat in her room. For hours at a time, she folded her hands neatly in her lap and stared at the door as if she were waiting. Emily grew unsettled by her. Patients normally showed some sign of emotion, anger, sadness, fear, but Evelyn had nothing. It's just that fixed, patient stare. Sometimes she didn't even blink for minutes at a time. On the night everything changed, Emily was assigned to do rounds on Evelyn's ward. It was around midnight when she approached room 26. She knocked softly before opening the door. The room was empty. Her first thought was panic. Patients couldn't just leave, not from a locked ward. The doors were secured with heavy magnetic locks, the windows reinforced with steel bars, yet Evelyn wasn't there. Emily called security, and the search began. They combed every hallway, every storage closet, even the grounds outside. Hours passed. No Evelyn. Then, at around 3 in the morning, one of the orderlies swore he saw her. He'd been pushing a supply cart down the north corridor when he glanced up and froze. At the far end of the hall, lit by a single flickering light, Evelyn stood perfectly still, staring at him. He blinked, and she was gone. They searched that hall from top to bottom. Nothing. No open doors, no sign of her. Just empty air where she had stood. The next night it happened again. A nurse claimed she saw Evelyn sitting calmly in the laundry room, folding sheets.
Baby.
When the nurse approached, Evelyn simply wasn't there anymore. By the 3rd night, nearly half the staff had reported glimpses of her, standing in stairwells, sitting in the cafeteria after hours. Even outside in the courtyard, despite all the doors being locked, always silent, always vanishing when anyone got close. Emily couldn't shake it. She started digging through the hospital's records, searching for anything about Evelyn's history. But when she pulled up the digital file, it was blank. No admission date, no diagnosis, no treatment notes. Just her name. Evelyn, patient 26. The next day, the file was gone altogether. When Emily asked about it, her supervisor cut her off sharply. "You don't need to worry about her anymore," he said. "Focus on your current patients." But Emily couldn't. How could a woman just disappear from a locked ward? How could her records be erased like she had never existed? A week later, Emily was finishing a late shift. She walked alone down the dim hallway toward the exit, exhausted and unsettled. That's when she noticed something in the glass window beside her. Her reflection, at least she thought it was. But standing just behind her reflection was another figure. Evelyn. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on Emily's. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words Emily couldn't hear. Emily spun around, heart racing. The hallway behind her was empty. She looked back at the window. The reflection showed only herself. That was the moment she decided to quit. She packed her things within days, moved to another state, and never worked in a hospital again. But the story didn't end there. A month later, Emily called me in the middle of the night. Her voice was trembling. She told me she had woken up at 2:47 a.m., to the feeling of being watched. When she opened her eyes, Evelyn was standing at the foot of her bed. Her lips were moving again, soundlessly. Emily tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, terrified, and when she opened them again, the room was empty. She thought it was a nightmare until she saw the bedsheet. At the bottom, where Evelyn had stood, the fabric was wrinkled, as though someone had pressed their weight into it. Weeks passed. Emily started seeing Evelyn everywhere, in mirrors, in store windows, reflected in car glass. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of her standing in the shadows of her own apartment, lips moving, always moving, whispering something inaudible. Emily told me she began sleeping with all the lights on, terrified of the dark. But it didn't matter. Evelyn appeared anyway. The last time Emily and I spoke, she said something that still makes my skin crawl. "She's getting closer," she whispered over the phone. At first, she was always far away, across the hall, in the window, in the corner of my room, but now she's right next to me. I can almost feel her breath. The call ended abruptly. I've tried contacting her since then, but she doesn't answer. Her number is still active, but no one picks up. Her apartment sits empty, her belongings still inside. The only thing the landlord found was a single note left on the kitchen table. 3 words written in shaky handwriting. She told me, "No one has seen Emily since." And sometimes, late at night when I pass a dark window, I'm terrified to look too closely. Because if Evelyn followed Emily out of that hospital, then maybe she's not done waiting. Maybe she's standing just behind me, lips moving, whispering something I'm not supposed to hear.